So the little pregame show was the audience trying to guess what games I'm going to be talking about. We're going to list the 50 most influential video games of all time, one per year. Some of these are old classics, some of them you may never have heard of, but they are super influential in your life anyways. My name's Jeff Ryan, and here we go. I started this because I wrote a whole book about Super Mario, and I wrote another book all about Mickey Mouse, which I thought of as a prequel, which most people just don't think of because it didn't do that well. And I have two new books coming out very soon in a couple of months on a Kickstarter. One of them is called Your Worshipfulness. I haven't talked about this at all, so this is the public unveiling. It's all about Carrie Fisher and Princess Leia. The other one is called Father and Son Issues. It is about a team of artists, John Romita and John Romita Jr., who've been drawing Spider-Man for 60 years straight. So when you're done with the gaming world and you want to look at something else, these would be great. And in 2 minutes' time, we are going to jump right into the list, and it's going to be a lot of fun. But for 2 minutes, I need to become Mr. Rogers. So there's a lot of signage up at MAGFest, and much of it is very clever jokes at the bottom. This one says, the first in-person social interaction you've had in 2 years. So true. This is funny stuff. All your friends waiting for you, and then an emoticon, and then high-quality brickwork. Oh, that's this stuff, oh yeah. This one is a joke that some people might not get. Others do get it. This seems to be a reference to Gamergate, where male gamers harassed and doxed female gamers in the supposed name of game journalism. If that's the case, the joke relies on female gamers being harassed and doxed. MAGFest volunteers have taken down the sign, and they've also posted an apology on Twitter, but it's still all over Twitter. The only thing many people not at MAGFest know about MAGFest now is that sign. I can guarantee I know what the person who made the sign looks like. He looks like me. A cis, white, straight guy, who you see in a create a character mode before you personalize it and make it interesting. Gaming is all about learning from mistakes. That was a mistake, and now it's a lesson. Joking about prejudice is a form of mental conditioning to teach prejudice. This is a quote from a researcher, Thomas E. Ford. A large and growing body of psychology research suggests that disparagement humor can foster discrimination against targeted groups. It's important that people who weren't the topic of the joke, like me, call it out. We shouldn't be complicit. Everyone is welcome and wanted here. Okay, Mr. Rogers, 2 minutes is done. On to the 1970s. So, the game of the year for 1971, the first true video game is Computer Space. If you went into an arcade in 1971, you would see, if the right arcade, you would see Computer Space. Now, what you may ask was in the arcade if this was the very first arcade game? Well, there were pinball machines, there were the electronic claw machines, there were test your strength machines, there were love testers, there were pool hall games, but this was the first actual true video game. This was taken from a 10-year-old game called Space War, which is played on the PDP-1 computer. This wasn't a great hit because it was very complicated to play. It's kind of like Asteroids. There's a version in a fun spot in New Hampshire. I played it a year or two ago. It's amazing. You can play a 50-year-old video game yourself if you drive up there. But we need to find out what happens next. What's an easier to play game than Computer Space? Pong, yes, the game of the year for 1972. It says so right there, Pong, avoid missing ball for high score. Now, the trick of Pong was that there was no computer involved. This is basically a solid state piece of hardware. You need two different people to play Pong. This is going to come back 50 years later in another game of the year, which was an exclusive two-party game. But for now, Pong, you are only as good as your opponent, because the better you are, the better they have to be in order to keep playing. And once the first person gets to 10, they end up winning. Okay, on to 1973, Lemonade Stand. This is the first educational video game. The idea of Lemonade Stand was to teach kids the basics of running a business. If you want to run a lemonade stand, you need to have lemons, you need to have sugar, and you need for it to be a sunny day because people won't buy lemonade. Right outside now, it was actually a very good day to buy lemonade, and it's January. But the point of Lemonade taught kids the thinking about the fundamentals of business in a way that they hadn't ever before. And there are lots of other versions of this game that have propagated down through the decades to try to teach kids. And the whole educational edutainment idea began right here. It was a game made in Minnesota. On to 74, Tank. This was made by Atari. It first came out for the VCX, which would then get recalled to 2600. Recalled. That I just made up the word recall, but it sounds like it was, recalled, but it was renamed. So what made Tank so important is that this was the first game for the military-industrial complex. It turns out it is a lot cheaper to play a game of Tank than to actually get 8 people in a tank and have another 8 people get in another tank and drive the tanks around. It takes up a huge amount of gasoline, and you got to pay all the soldiers. So it's much easier to have the 2 of the soldiers play a game of Tank. And Atari was commissioned by the military to make a game of Tank that matched up with the movement of actual military US tanks. And Atari is a bunch of pot-smoking hippies at this point. So the last thing they want to do is work with the military, but the military is offering good money, and it's an engineering challenge, so they end up doing it. And that begins a very long and fruitful relationship between the gaming industry and the military. On to 1975, Breakout. This was a breakout hit for Atari. There had been about 8 million Pong clones and literally over 100 Pong consoles. You can have, if you started to collect the home Pong game, and it's the same game, you can have 100 different consoles of it. It would be the world's most boring collection. I don't think anyone ever has a complete set. But a much better version of the paddleball game is Breakout, because look, first of all, it's in color, and it's a one-player game. It doesn't take computer intelligence because you're just breaking all the bricks, and then as long as you make the bricks in different patterns every round, you have a bunch of series of different rounds. This was one of the big hits for Atari. On to 1976. This is our first controversial video game. This is a game called Death Race. It doesn't look like much, it just looks like a Matchbox car and a couple of crosses. Those crosses represent dead bodies. And you are driving around in that little car, and when you see a little guy or person that's moving around, you run them over, and then you get points for it. And parents were not happy about this game. For the first of 8 million times, parents realized, what are my kids playing? What is Junior doing? Is he killing people? And the Death Race people tried to backpedal by saying, oh, no, it's a zombie game. They're running over zombies, therefore it's good that you run over human beings and kill them, because they're already dead. And that was also the first time that the gaming industry needed to backpedal. On to 1977. Here is our text-based adventure, literally called Adventure. So, computers back then were so new and so underpowered that monitors didn't exist. Computers existed, but monitors didn't. So when you typed out a line of code, it printed out on the printer with those, with all the papers connecting to each other, that sound. Dot matrix printer, yes, thank you. So the first adventure game was based on a cave in Kentucky, Mammoth Cave. And apparently, I haven't done this, but you were able to navigate through the cave based on how they describe where you go in adventure. And what the great thing for adventure was that the adventure was really in your mind. They were just looking at images, or you're looking at images of words here, but you could imagine anything. Games like Zork and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy followed in here because you could truly have an adventure of a lifetime because the world's greatest graphics engine is providing it. On to 1978, Space Invaders. This is important partly because it's the first Japanese hit video game from Taito. And it's also important because it's the first game that gives you 3 lives instead of 1. I believe it's the first popular game. There may have been some other earlier ones. But Space Invaders became a huge hit, and there's about 100 different knockoffs of Space Invaders that came out. And this let Japan know, oh, we're pretty good at technology, we're pretty good at making games, and we can sell this not just in Kyoto and Tokyo, but we can sell it all over the world. We can have a global influence in the electronics world. On to 1979. The game of the year is Flight Simulator. And Flight Simulator is one of the first professional games where actual pilots played this game and got better with their instrument ratings because it so accurately modeled the real world. My Uncle Hugh was a commercial pilot and flew for the Coast Guard. And he practiced on Flight Simulator on a Commodore 64. And when he got back in the cockpit, his instructor was like, Hugh, have you been practicing more? You've gotten a lot better. And he's like, well, I just played around on the computer. But that is practice, that is training. And 20 years later, not to bum everyone down again, but the people who are responsible for 9/11 practice on flight simulators. Okay, we're going into the 1980s. See the font I picked? Hopefully it makes you feel the 1980s, but most of you have probably not been born yet. I don't want to think about how old that makes me that I do remember the 80s. But the rest of you who remember the 80s, you were all in the same elderly boat, and we'll all pass the Bengay around afterwards. Okay, 1980, the game of the year is Pac-Man. There was a huge trend of maze games that hit the world, and Pac-Man was the leading maze game for a long time. Pac-Man is also the first game that had a kill screen, meaning that you could only play for 253 or 4 or 5 levels. At a certain point, the game just froze on you, so there was a limit to the amount of pellets you could get and the score you could get, which then made people think, oh, well, how close to that absolute limit can I get? How high up on the asymptote chart can I get my score? And people are still trying to do it. Just recently, someone found a way of getting a few extra points eaten in the game of Pac-Man, so they were able to better a Pac-Man score for the first time in decades. On to 1981. I would be remiss as the person who wrote a whole book about Super Mario to not include Mario's first appearance in Donkey Kong. Donkey Kong is a playable game in the arcade. You can play an actual 1981 version of Donkey Kong. You won't play the original Donkey Kong though, because the cabinet is blue. The original Donkey Kong has an origin story that it was a game called Radar Scope that was supposed to be a knockoff of Space Invaders, and Nintendo tried to sell it and they couldn't, so they hired a guy named Shigeru Miyamoto who had no experience making games. Footnote, he now has a lot of experience making games. And he broke all of the rules of video games to make Donkey Kong. One of the rules he broke was that there were 4 different levels before you play the same level again. That basically meant you made 4 different games. And so for 1 quarter, if you kept on winning, you could play 4 different games in a row. Normally that would mean Nintendo had 4 different games and 4 different consoles to sell, or 4 different cabinets, but they were all here in Donkey Kong. Another one is that there were recognizable characters. Mario and Pauline and Donkey Kong are recognizable humanish shapes, and I just called Donkey Kong human, yes. Well, he's an ape, so apes kind of count. And yes, he's not a donkey. Mr. Miyamoto looked up a Japanese English dictionary to try to find a word that meant stubborn, and he found donkey, and thus the stubborn gorilla became Donkey Kong. Okay, moving on to 1982, pole position. We got to get some driving games in here, because driving, we had talked about a previous game where you got to run over humans or zombies, depending upon if you believe the spin or not. But pole position was an actual racing game that required some speed and finesse and some ability, which is pretty close to real racing. Now it's not great shakes by nowadays, but if you ever played a racing game, this is where it really truly began. On to 1983, we got some vector graphics coming on here with Star Wars. Star Wars is not officially the first licensed game. No one is going to get this trivia question, but the first licensed game was called The Fonz from 1976. Yes, there was a Happy Days video game in the 70s, and somehow I didn't list it as Game of the Year. Star Wars had come out in '77, so this game is not a direct parallel because it waited 6 years before it came out, but the graphics are amazing. To this day, they're amazing. I have a friend who spent top dollar and has one of these in his living room because he said it was the only game he couldn't emulate otherwise. And he's electrocuted himself 2 or 3 times because there's a lot of fine stuff in the back there, and he refuses to wear gloves. But there is not a playable version of Star Wars here, but there is a Vectrex. A Vectrex is one of the rare consoles that was vector graphics based instead of raster graphics, which is basically graphics. So the graphics look amazing, but they also look like 1983 over here. Okay, moving on to 1984 with King's Quest. Yes, Roberta Williams has done the world well. This was a point-and-click adventure. This was also a sort of typing adventure. So you would pick a verb and a noun, and your character would start doing things based on if you pick the right verb or noun. It could get a little frustrating because you needed to pick up the right language. You know, you can't say... You can't say drink liquid, you need to say drink water because it may not know the word liquid. But King's Quest launched a whole series of games from Sierra. Sierra nowadays doing things very differently than point-and-click 1980s adventures for the whole family. But Sierra back in the 80s also made Leisure Suit Larry, which was also not fun for the whole family. But that was something for the dads and the older brothers to show their young nephews. Okay, 1985. Woo! I wasn't sure if I had Tetris on the list, and I was going to have to do the Charlie Brown sad walk away if I had forgotten. But I remembered. Tetris, there should be and there will be a movie of the backstory of Tetris. And I'd love to sit down for an hour and a half and tell you the whole story. But some of the grace notes are that Alexei Pajitnov made up Tetris. If you look real close, those are not actual characters. Those are just like, it's ASCII art. And so he made a game based on ASCII art. It was great. It started to get sent in samizdat versions all around the USSR, which is what Russia was back when it was a Soviet communist country. And an enterprising British person decided to sell it all around the world and pretended that he had gotten the rights to it. So Tetris became the game of the year. It was selling millions of copies, and every single copy was pirated. And long story short, 2 or 3 years later, Nintendo sits down with a bunch of Russians who are trying to learn what capitalism is for the first time, and they write a very big check to cover all of the lost licensing rights to Tetris over the years, and that lets them get Tetris as a pack-in game for the first Game Boy, which goes on to sell millions of copies. And there is a Game Boy with Tetris up in the International Space Station brought up by a cosmonaut. I don't know if it still works. They probably have better tech than that. Hopefully, knock on wood. On to 1986. Super Mario Brothers. There's no argument here. There's no possible reason why this can't be or shouldn't be the game of the year. This was the first giant side-scrolling adventure. Okay, on to 1987. I said I wouldn't be too much of a Nintendo fanboy, but I can't help it. I got to put Legend of Zelda up there. The legend of this was that Shigeru Miyamoto, as a boy, was exploring around in his Kyoto suburb, and he wandered into one cave and kept on exploring and wandered out another. And that gave him an idea and a love for exploration and subterranean travel. So in Legend of Zelda, you wander all around and you go into different caves and you fight different bad guys, and eventually you save a princess. That, by the way, a bit of really, really in-depth trivia that you're not going to hear anywhere else. That is not Zelda. His name is Link. And I don't know why he's so obsessed about the leg end of Zelda. I mean, just call it a foot. Okay, on to 1988. Madden. This is technically our second sports game. The first sports game was Pong, because Pong is table tennis. The legend of Madden was that John Madden was asked to put his name on a video game, and he said, I can't do it unless you actually have 22 sprites on screen moving around, because football is an 11-player versus 11-player game. And so the people in like 1984 is like 22 moving sprites. Okay, we'll get back to you, John, on that. How about 3-on-3? But he insisted, and eventually the tech was good enough to have a full 11 on 11 squad. And every year, more and more enhancements were added, and you hit a point around 2001 where the game was as good as it could be. So any enhancements end up making the game worse because you're trying to fix something that's not broken. But you need to do it because you need to put out a new version every year. Okay, the game of the year for 1989, Solitaire. I would also accept Minesweeper. Now, the reason why this was so important was because this was when the world started to actually get desktop personal computers, and they came with mice or mouses, however you want to pluralize it, and people didn't know how to use these things. They were holding them up to their ears. That scene in Star Trek IV where Scotty is talking into it, that actually happened. People needed to be taught a fun way of thinking about the mouse as an extension of their hand, and Solitaire was a way of doing that. Solitaire also had a tracker that you needed to click to see that said how many games you had played and how many total minutes you had played. And that was a dark night of the soul when you found that and said, oh, 3,000 games? Wow, 150 hours? I've had this game 1 year? What have I been doing with my life? Okay, we're on to the 1990s. The game of the year for 1990 is Wing Commander. This was the first CD-ROM-based game that was a big hit, and it also featured some actual acting, putting actors in a bunch of dumb costumes and filming them. And you got guys like Tim Curry and Mark Hamill to join the franchise and actually, act, not just ham it up and phone it in. Although Tim Curry hamming it up is the best you're ever going to get. Okay, 1991. I tried not to have too many sequels on here, but I couldn't include Street Fighter because Street Fighter was just an average, fine, pretty good game. Street Fighter II was the thing that played forever and ever. If you want to experience what 1991 is like, just take a quarter and put it on top of Street Fighter II, and you are acting out the default experience of 1991, watching someone else play Street Fighter II. Okay, no. So this game is famous for being violent but not bloody. We're going on to the game in 1992, which is violent and bloody. This was how you improved on Street Fighter II. You included fatalities. And famously, Nintendo refused to release blood on their SNES version of Mortal Kombat. Sega said, blood's fine, yeah, we'll put lots of blood in, and then Sega's Genesis became what the cool kids were playing. Nintendo was what your little brother played. So once you were 8 or 9, then you aged out of Nintendo. And for about 30 years, Nintendo has been fighting that reputation. On to 1993. I swear it's not going to get all grim and gritty the whole time, but we have to have the game of the year being Doom. So Doom started off as an experiment to see how fast a game could be played using a first-dimensional camera. They had previously tried it with a game called Operation Wolf. No, that's wrong. Yes, Wolfenstein, Castle Wolfenstein. Why am I thinking of Operation? I thought of Operation and I led down the wrong path. So Doom is a game that's still played nowadays. One of the ways of testing if your little thermometer was able to work was, well, there's a little display screen on there. Could we play Doom on that? I bet we could upload and play Doom on that. There is a thermometer that plays Doom. I don't actually know how you shoot or change your weapons around, but it's possible. It's in there. Okay, on to 1994. We have finally stopped killing people because the game of the year is Myst. There are no actual characters in Myst. There's just environments. You move around from place to place. It's a CD-ROM-based game. It takes a little while to load up, but it's very ethereal. It's very peaceful. There are mysteries to solve. Some of the mysteries were hard enough so that people would dial up on America Online or Earthlink or Prodigy and go on a message board to find out what the clues were to get to the next level. That was a brand new thing. Okay, we're moving to 1995. The game of the year is Resident Evil. This is the first horror and suspense game that became a big hit. And one of the ways that Resident Evil made horror and suspense feel real was that there were limiting actions. Let's say that this is a gun or a knife, and there's a zombie coming, and in real life I'd run away. But in my imagined superhero world, I would grab the knife and then stab the zombie. In Resident Evil, there's the knife, and the zombie kills me. You move so slow, and it makes you so scared that you're going to make a wrong choice that you end up panicking way more than you normally would than playing a normal fast twitch response video game. And that is one of the ways that Resident Evil makes you feel scared, not just the oogity boogities that are attacking you, but the fact that your response time is slowed and you are making bad decisions. On to 1996. The game of the year is a player of the year, Deep Blue. So there had been lots of chess computers over the years, and none of them were able to beat a grandmaster. I mean, they could beat me when I was 8 because I wasn't very good, but you can't beat Garry Kasparov if you're a computer. And then Deep Blue came around. What real opponents do when they play each other is try to psych each other out. You think I'm going to go Scholar's Mate, and then I change it up on you, so you don't know where I'm going. Computers don't do that. Computers simply make optimal moves. And what threw Kasparov off was that Deep Blue made a non-optimal move. And Kasparov all of a sudden was like, wait, no, that's the wrong move. That's not what he should have made. Maybe I'm wrong. Oh no, maybe I'm not seeing the right move after all. That threw him off the game. He ended up losing match after match after match. He won 1 out of 5 matches, I believe. And this, if Skynet ever takes over the world and Roko's Basilisk comes true, this is the moment when, this is the moment. Okay, on to 1997. I was lying. I did have Final Fantasy VII. The important part of Final Fantasy VII comes from a character called Aerith. And you're trying to save Aerith, but she dies. And this is a pre-programmed response, but you weren't used to this in games like this. You just accepted that you would just, not have her on your team. You'd pick someone else instead, but it always had to be Aerith, and Aerith always died. It's not a matter of mana or hit points or healing her up beforehand. It's a scheduled event. And this was the next step in gaming storytelling, where people actually felt bad. They felt bad and they felt the loss in a way that they don't feel it when Pitfall Harry dies. I did mention Pitfall. Okay, the game of the year for 1998 is Pokémon. So, Nintendo just released the Game Boy Color. Lots of color all over the place. And now this weird little game from Japan called Pokemon comes out. It is in black and white. It is extraordinarily Japanese in that there are like 150 different characters that all kind of look the same and all look very cute. And then you just keep on fighting them with some sort of rock, paper, scissors analogy over and over and over again. And this is where the president of Nintendo of America, Minu Arakawa, made a very bold and wonderful decision. He said, we are going to translate this game into American English. We're just going to release it as is. We are not going to try to dumb this down for American audiences. We're going to let them get weird. We're going to let them get intricate in this game because I think Americans are now thinking the same weird way that us Japanese are thinking. And it worked. Pokemon is a global multi-billion-dollar franchise now. 1999, Tony Hawk Pro Skater. There was a whole series of action sports games, and if you lived in the late 90s, you assumed they'd be around forever. Every year there's going to be another wakeboarding game, there's going to be another snowboarding game, there's going to be an extreme skiing game, and it didn't last forever. It was a brief, wonderful moment, and then it went away. But Tony Hawk comes back with a new game every couple of years. But until then, you were able to experience a mix of sports and trying to score as many high points as possible, because that's basically what skating is. You're trying to beat your best move from before. In its own way, it's kind of like golf. Golf except with head protection. Okay, on to the 2000s. I got to go super fast because I feel like I'm going too slow, even though I feel like there's so much I'm leaving out. I want to put everything in. Okay, the game of the year for 2000 is The Sims. And one reason for this is because every 3 months there is another Sims expansion pack. An expansion pack makes you think, oh, it's like another 12 levels. No, an expansion pack means like there are 4 dogs to pick from and they have dog collars. Give me $20 for a dog and a dog collar. And then we have a dog spa. Give me another $20. And people bought these expansion packs, and We're able to go skiing and get a pool, and all of the downloadable content and microtransactions begins in earnest here. The Sims was the first of many purchases that people in the year 2000 made about The Sims, and that is how game industry people feel about you now. If you buy a game, it's the beginning of a series of transactions where you give money to us. Okay, Game of the Year for 2001, Grand Theft Auto 3. GTA 1 and 2 are fine games, but they're top-down. This gives you a much more free world sandbox perspective. The problem with Grand Theft Auto 3, and it takes 10 years for it to be fixed, is that you can't do anything good in this game. This game teaches you how to be a criminal, because what you can do if you see a little old lady walking down the street, you can beat her up. You can kill her, you can run her over with a car, you can mug her, or you can leave her alone. Leaving her alone is pretty boring because you're just wandering around on the streets with nothing to do. So that puts you in the mindset of someone up to no good. But we will fix this in a decade. 2002, Splinter Cell. So there's a game called Thief, which was a previous stealth game. Splinter Cell really set the high bar for not thievery so much as the stealthy idea that it's not cool to wander into a room and kill everyone in it. It's cool to wander into a room, no one knows you're there, maybe you shoot out a light, maybe you grab the MacGuffin you're trying to grab and you get out of there before any alarms go off. That is real mastery. The Game of the Year for 2003 is Enter the Matrix. Now, if you watch the Matrix sequels, the first one is great, the second and third kind of don't make a lot of sense at some points, and Jada Pinkett Smith has a character called Niobe who's just kind of there but doesn't serve any plot purpose. That is because you need to play the tie-in game Enter the Matrix, where she is the main character, and her appearances in the movie are just like a cameo because she is the real star here, and there are key parts of the Matrix franchise that you'll only get by playing the tie-in video game. Peter Jackson tried this also with King Kong in the following year. He was credited as the director of the video game of King Kong, but this unfortunately didn't go on forever. So when you watch Aquaman, it's not like, that didn't make sense, but the Aquaman game for the PlayStation 4 explains all of this. Okay, 2004. Do I need to explain why World of Warcraft is on there and why people are still playing and why someone may be in this room playing it right now? The Game of the Year for 2005 is Guitar Hero. For about 5 years, this was the way of oh, I can do this. I realize the table is basically wired for sound. Mortal Kombat! Sorry. Okay, that was obviously Mortal Kombat, but not Guitar Hero. But you can play video games and you can feel like you're playing music in a way that you had never before in any other like timing beating game. Okay, up to 2006. Someone had guessed Wii Sports, and yes, this is one of the most successful games of all time. If you bought a Wii, it came with Wii Sports. I had to pick from one of 5 different games. I picked bowling. I was actually in a competitive Wii Sports league against a woman, and it was weird because every single person in the room was rooting for this older woman who was in a bowling league, and she was throwing strikes nonstop, and I was trying to do my best, but I was being booed and hissed because everyone wanted her to win, and she ended up winning, and she got to take home the Wii. This was like in 2007 when taking home a Wii was a really big deal. Wiis are also still found in senior citizen centers. This let a lot of people who couldn't get into the bowling alley or onto the golf course or into the boxing ring. This gave them a chance to experience sports in a real way that wasn't pressing a button, because you're doing things like this and this. It feels much more realistic and natural, like the actual sport. And there are still some motion-based games, but this was a trend that was big for about 10 years, as with the music games, and then have kind of subsided. On to 2007, Portal, yes. One thing I love about Portal is this idea is so simple. You can make an Atari 2600 game that is 2-bit, and you could have a blue rectangle and an orange rectangle, and you walk through one and you come out the other. And the gameplay would be basically the same. There wouldn't be as many levels, it would be rather simplistic, but you could do this on an Atari. There are great game ideas out there that have still not been tapped. Games that could have been made 20, 30, 40 years ago. And we are still discovering them, and it's just a wonder to know that we're not done. There are still more adventures to be had, more fundamentally new ways of seeing the world and engaging with it. Okay, on to 2008, Wii Fit. If anyone here checked their pedometer to see how many steps they got, because you're walking all over the place today, you are basically playing an updated version of Wii Fit. Shigeru Miyamoto had gotten a few Good Life pounds on and decided to go on a bit of a diet. And he really liked the idea that every day he would do various different things with diet and exercise. He'd get on the scale at the start of the day and he'd see how well he did the day before. And if you think like Shigeru Miyamoto, everything is grist for a video game. So he made a video game out of it. And now, for most people, if you go on something like Noom, losing weight is almost like its own sort of video game journey, where you have goals that you're trying to reach, and there are good ways of doing it and bad ways of doing it. On to 2009. Minecraft officially came out in 2011, but there's an early... Is someone hissing at Minecraft? Oh, the creeper sound. Okay. I thought there's someone who was truly like Minecraft. No one plays that game anymore. Now, my daughter is obsessed with Minecraft. 2009 was the year she was born, so it lines up nicely. Minecraft is also probably the most watched game on Twitch. Okay, up to the 2010. So much more I want to tell you about everything, but we got to keep to the schedule. Okay, 2010. This is the redemption, not just of Red Dead and this guy John, but of Grand Theft Auto 3. This is a sandbox game with morals. You are a guy with a gun and you could shoot anyone in the world, but you don't, because you are trying to redeem yourself. You are trying to be a good and moral person. Red Dead Redemption makes you a better person when you play it, unless you are the sort of person who just wanders around and shoots all the horses, in which case please don't come up to me afterwards. Okay, 2011. As with Super Mario Brothers, there's ways of learning about a game, and the only way you learn in Dark Souls is by dying. And then you come back, and you don't die by the first obstacle, but then you die by the second obstacle. It's kind of like Groundhog Day in its way. So just imagine, because it's a first-person game sometimes, just imagine you're Bill Murray playing this in Dark Souls. On to 2012. Now you can boo and hiss. Now you can boo and hiss. Candy Crush is here because everyone's mom has this on their phone and they're moving things around and say, why do you play video games all the time? I mean, you're just obsessed with it. And you're like, Mom, you're playing one now. It's like, no, I'm playing Candy Crush. This counts as a video game. There have been match threes forever, but Candy Crush has found ways of engaging the brains in the chemicals in your brain over and over again, so you keep on playing. I don't want to know the highest level someone is at in Candy Crush, but it may be 4 digits. Someone in this room may be at 3. Definitely 3. I'm at level 800. Okay. Every once in a while, you guys were shouting the names of great games, and I kept saying, no. No one shouted out The Last of Us. I would have said yes, because Last of Us is amazing. I don't need to explain why Last of Us is up here, right? Yeah, but I had a relatively firm no sequel rule, which I am immediately breaking now, I'm realizing. But Mario Kart 8 is up here, not just because Mario Kart is so incredible to play and is still being played, but this set a new standard. The standard is Nintendo games are $60 forever until the end of time. It's never going on sale. You need to pay $60 if you want to play Mario Kart, and it's the same game since 2014, basically. And then you buy it over and over again. Yes, I forgot to mention that you're going to buy it repeatedly. On to 2015. This is a real hard pass here, because most people have not even heard of this game. But if you've ever if you ever watched Bandersnatch, the Black Mirror episode, or any of the other Netflix interactive games, this is basically where it began. They filmed this woman, and you are a detective asking her questions. All you see are her responses. It doesn't play or feel like any other video game. It feels like watching television that is interactive. And you can do this on Netflix now, but it started here. Okay, on to 2016. We need to talk about the augmented reality in the room. There could be a Squirtle around here right now, and none of us are aware of it, except for the person who takes out their phone and then is just wandering around trying to catch it. Pokemon Go was a huge phenomenon, and it still is, and there are other ARGs out there. ARGs in 20 years may be what everyone is playing. I'm not sure. We will find out together in the future, because that's where you and I will be living for the rest of our lives. On to 2007. We didn't have Roblox yet, but now we have Roblox, and Roblox is the most popular game called Adopt Me. Again, my daughter plays this game all the time. If you are an adult, you don't know how often the kids are playing this game. It is I don't have words to describe what it looks like, because this looks like the ugliest game I've ever seen in my life. But the kids don't care. It was like they looked at the graphics of Minecraft and said, I can do worse. And like, there's going to be something in 10 years from now that's just going to be like static, moving around. And I feel like an old man now complaining, the Beastie Boys, it's just noise, it's just noise. On to 2018. Superheroes have become a dominant part of entertainment, and I wrote a whole book about Spider-Man that's coming out soon. But as great as the Arkham games were, this is the definitive, this is what it's like to be a superhero game. Everyone wanted to swing around through Manhattan, and there had been lots of Spider-Man games, but they didn't quite feel correct. Some of it was too hard, some of it was too easy, some of it was a beat 'em up. This is the game where you really could just swing around for hours and hours in a photorealistic New York and take pictures and sell them to J. Jonah Jameson, who uses them to talk about how terrible you are. I don't know why he doesn't just quit. Okay, if you can do your math, we are very close to done. On to 2019. There are some questions in life that have never truly been asked, such as, what if a goose was an asshole? And finally, we have an answer to that question. Okay, moving into the COVID era. So, the game of the year for the COVID era technically came out 2 years before, but because we were all inside and we were all suspicious that people are going to get each other sick, we wanted a game that gave us that feeling. So I'm just going to share more stuff about my daughter. She got very upset because she was left out of a Teams chat or some sort of status update, and then it turns out that her friends didn't actually leave her out. They were just setting up a game of Among Us. And she had heard about the missing group chat, and she felt so bad, and then she found out, oh, it's just Among Us. People are still playing this game, but I find it very sus. Okay. Way back in the 70s, I talked about how Pong was a two-player game. The game of the year for 2001 is also a two-player game. There are more adults playing games than kids. There are married couples who are playing games. And this is a game not for the 13-year-old energetic kid drinking Code Red. This is a game for the 35-year-old parents whose kids are now bed, and they can play what is basically a romantic comedy about a couple getting back in touch with each other. And it just so happens that they've shrunken down and turned into these little wood toy people. Okay, up to the game of the year for 2022. We've had Goose, and now we have Cat. Now, Stray may not be the world's greatest game. It may not even be the best cyberpunk-related game that came out in this decade, but it's a cat, and you get to wander around as a cat, and it's a photorealistic cat, and it does cat things, and it's the internet. The internet loves cats. So, we are 5 days into 2023. I want to open up questions to find out what you think the game of the year for 2023 is going to be. Anyone know or take a guess? Thinking about what's coming out? Yes.
Probably the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild sequel.
The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild sequel coming out this year. We'll see if that is game of the year material. I mean, it's Zelda. It's never not going to be good. Yes. Okay, Silksong, yes. This is criminally underrepresenting the Metroidvania genre. Someone else had their hand up. I thought, oh, yes. Hades 2. Okay, getting a round of applause for Hades 2. Great. A more sustained round of applause. That's the way democracy works, the loudest noise. It's not out yet, but it's already Game of the Year, just like that 50 Cent game. Oh, what was that game, Bulletproof? Blood in the Sand. Well, you know, you came to a Game of the Year story. Of course, we're going to talk about Blood in the Sand. Okay, I don't know if I have any more because we are up to live on the calendar. So until 2024 comes around, I think this is it for me. Thank you all for your time, everyone. Thanks for coming by.